Buddy, we are so excited. Good morning, everyone. We are so excited to have you here with us. Thank you for joining us early this Monday morning. We are so pleased to have Mr. Scott Riley, author of The Floating Field, here for our Bluestem author chat this morning. Today we have 3 classes, and the way this works is we will have you each take turns asking questions, 2 questions per class at a time. Students, just a few reminders, you can say your name, but you should probably only use your first name. And then have some backup questions because somebody might have the same question as you. So if somebody asks your question, feel free to ask something different. All right. And now I'd like to introduce Mr. Scott Riley.
Hi, everybody. It's so good to see you all. I have to thank you for, I think there's a class saying the Pledge of Allegiance right now, so hopefully we're not interrupting. But I want to thank you for coming so early in the morning. I want to show you what it looks like outside my window right now. I don't know if you can see it. It's very dark. So I'm coming to you all the way from Singapore, where I live. And so maybe later you can look on a map where Singapore is. I'll give you a hint. It's in Asia. It's south of Thailand. And I might show it on a map later if a question comes up about it. But I've lived here a long time with my family. And that's where I found out about the story about Prosit and the floating field. And I can't wait to hear your questions that you have for me.
Okay, if you're ready, we will start with Ms. Jarrick's class. Go ahead and unmute for your 2 questions.
Cheryl, go ahead. Can you speak Thai? They wanted to know if he can speak Thai.
I cannot speak Thai. And actually, when I first went to the island, I did a bunch of research. I read all these articles and I saw some videos online. And I was so intrigued by Prasit and his story that I went to Thailand and I went to his island. And I'll show you a picture of what the island looks like in just a second. But I didn't know if Prosit was there. I didn't know if the floating field was still there. And so let me show you what a picture of the village looks like. Can you see that picture? And that's the village of Koh Phangan. It's about 200 people who live on the island. And it's a working village. The hundreds of families live there. They've lived there for a couple hundred years where they migrated from Indonesia. So when I went to the island, I didn't know if Prasit spoke English. I didn't speak Thai, so I had to use my phone and translate. And luckily I found Prasit. He still lives there with his family. He's an older man. He's my age. And so when I found him, I was so thankful that he could speak English. And so he could tell me his story. And so here we are in that first day when Prasit and I first met. Do you have another question for me?
Adam, go ahead. Where is Singapore?
Ah, good question. I'm going to show it to you on the map. We'll go back to here we are. If you can see, here we are. And let me go to the map. So here is a map of Southeast Asia. Here's an inset map so you can see it's on the other side of the globe in Asia. And here's a blown up map. You can see Thailand, which you've probably heard of. Bangkok is the capital of Thailand. And Koh Phangan, where Prasit lives, is just down here on the west coast of Thailand. And you can see I live down here in Singapore, which is a city on the southern tip of this peninsula, south of Malaysia. So this is about a 2.5 hour plane ride from Singapore to Thailand. And when I came to Thailand, here's a blown up map of the area where Koh Phangan is this little island up here, but a a place where you may have heard of is called Phuket. A lot of tourists go to this area. It has beautiful beaches and it has beautiful snorkeling and kayaking. But for me, I wanted to go up here in a taxi just to see Prasit. And so that day, I went up to the ferry terminal where they take these long boats out. They call these boats long boats. They make loud noise with their motors. And you can see they're very big. They like to fill them up with tourists going out to the islands and just to sightsee. And but me, I just wanted to go to Prasit's Island. And not a lot of people just go to Prasit's Island. They go by it. But I had to find a boat that would just take me. And there I am while I'm sitting looking back at the driver. I had to convince the driver to take only one passenger instead of 30 or 40. But once you go out into the beautiful bay, you see these huge cliffs that I think the illustrators really captured well in the book. And up ahead lay the island of Koh Phangan. You can see the beautiful mosque here just at the base of this cliff. And that's really the heart of the village. And in no time, I was on the village, walking through the walkways, and I saw a school there. I was really just taking in all the sights and sounds. And, you know, this was the kind of research that I couldn't get from an article. So a lot of the little details that you read about or see in the photos, or sorry, the images in the book, this is from my experience being there. And you could see that these people's lives are very closely connected with the ocean. It's what they eat, it's their jobs, it's their skills. And then there I met these group of men who helped me find Prasit, who was by the mosque. And once we met and I knew he spoke English, he then told me all the history behind building the floating field. This is the third floating field. The original is long gone, because what happens, as you may know, in water is things don't really keep up that well, especially salt water. And you can see the boats here often are parked next to the field, which actually it bothers Prasit very much, because when boats kind of in the waves, they kind of bump up against the field. And you can see the newer versions of the field have this plastic, these buoys around, but this is all wood with some plastic over it. But because of Prasit and his friends, and if you've read the story, I don't want to tell you what happens in the tournament, but they go on and become a very famous soccer or football team, they call it, in most parts of the world, all in the region. And so even today, if you go there and it's afternoon after the fathers come back from fishing and all the jobs are done, kids are out of school, you'll still see the football club practicing, not on the floating field as much, but this is a concrete platform right next to the school. And you can see just behind here, these big poles where there's netting. So if they kick the ball, they make sure that it doesn't get into the water. So that's a little bit about what the island is like now, and what it felt like to go there for me for the first time.
Okay, well,
Sorry, we just one more question. How they want to know how you first heard about Prasit? And
Yeah, so like you all, I do a lot of research. I do a lot of reading and just exploring, especially around where I live. There's stories all around you in Illinois that you may not know about that are worth exploring. I don't know if there's some historical sites or cultural sites, but for me and my family, we like to learn about places here in Southeast Asia. And then if we're lucky, we get to go see them. And so when I read this article, I was really amazed at what these boys could do so long ago. And so I got really curious. And I don't know if you're like me, but when you get really curious, you have to read everything you can about it. And so I read all the articles. I looked at guidebooks. I looked at videos online. And I thought, well, it's not that far away. I mean, maybe I can just go there and see it for myself. So if there's anything that is really interesting near you, where you live, I'd really recommend that you go out there, take your family, and see what you find. You might be surprised at who you might meet and what's right in your backyard.
Thank you. We'll take 2 questions from Ms. Hennig's class, and then if Ms. Salami's class wants to type their questions in the chat, we're happy to ask them aloud for you.
Can't really hear yet.
Sorry, we're still thinking of a question.
Oh. That's okay.
Shut up, down, man.
So what was it like to live there and be there?
Oh, well, being there was really amazing because I got to see all of the jobs that people did. I got to there was one time he was walking around showing me all the places. If you remember in the story on one of the very first pages, he wakes up and it's the morning when the tide is out and they go right to Uncle's coffee shop. I don't know if you remember that scene. And they go and they have sugary bites of donut, and they get really excited for the day's soccer. And so what happened in real life was that Prosit, as soon as I met up with him, he said, let's go to Uncle's coffee shop. And he ordered sugary bites of donut and slices of jackfruit. And I thought those were great details to include in the story. It's probably what the boys ate that morning when they were going there. So lots of little details like that are all through the story. And all of my photos I shared with the illustrators. And so there's another photo you can see where a man is walking by carrying a caged bird. And one of the surprising details was that a lot of islanders have caged birds as a hobby. They love the songbirds. You can see the clothing. This is what people wear, the hijab, because they're Muslim there. So I don't think any of these details would have happened if I hadn't been on the island itself. And so when I went back and saw Prosit a second time, because I wrote the story and I want to make sure it was correct, I would ask him every little detail down to the color of the uniforms and the weather that it was and the details of the shoes coming off, all those details. I wanted to make sure that I was correct because it's a nonfiction book and it had to be as accurate as possible. Thanks for that question.
All right, we have one more. Go ahead, Parker.
Can you tell us more about the process of the book,
Like writing.
of writing it?
That's a great question. And I was thinking about this process, and I was really thinking about what the boys' process was. And so I'll show you a little bit of what I learned about the process of anything that you do. And for you, it could be learning a new instrument or getting better at a sport. And so one of the things I worry about sometimes is getting it right at first. I don't know if you're like me, but what I thought about my process in writing was to just start somewhere. And that's really what the boys did too. They didn't really know how to build a field or even put pieces of wood together that well. Prosit told me, but he said it didn't matter. He said, we just wanted to do it. So we just started. And so for me, as a writer, the process is really starting with a blank page. And I don't know if you're like me, but a blank page is pretty scary. But I've learned that it doesn't have to be. It's just to get anything out. And here's a first draft that I wrote. And it's very different than the real draft because I kept going back. I kept rereading. I tried it again a different way. And I just revised. And you probably know that part of the writing process. I actually think that's the most important part. And if you think about it, that's every part of the writing process is revise. And it's just like anything. The boys were revising in anything that they did. And sometimes you get feedback along the way. And I used to think feedback was showing some problems, but now I know that feedback is always showing possibilities. It's always a different way of doing things. And so I learned to get a lot more patient with myself as a writer. And I bet you can't guess how many drafts of the story I had to write for it to become a book. Why don't you show me with your fingers? How many drafts do you think? Total drafts? I see 10, 20. Any others? Oh, I see like 150, that one per, oh yeah, well, not that many, thank goodness. It was about 43 drafts that I wrote. And I think about, you know, because I'm a teacher as well, and I think about my students in drafts, and I think getting 2 or 3 drafts is that seems like a lot for them. But then when I was going through it, 43 seemed like, wow, it's so much better. I used to think that I had to be a good writer. I don't think that anymore. I have to be a good rewriter. And so I learned not to judge myself too soon in the process. And I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I have this voice in my head that tells me I'm not good enough yet. And I try and quiet that voice and just keep at it. And I guess what was really fascinating was I wasn't the only one working through a process. Here are some of the illustrators' first sketches, and they did a fabulous job, Quang and Lien. They're 2 illustrators from Vietnam, and my editor found them. And then you can see some of the first sketches here. And if you're an artist, I'm not as good an artist as they are, of course, but artists start with a very light sketch, you know, and then once they get a good feel, then they get a darker outline. You can see them playing around with Prosit, what he looks like. They're kind of figuring out what is it like when the boys move or they're building something. And for me, I do this with words and paragraphs, and I move them around and I change the order. I find different ones. And sometimes the work doesn't even end up being in the final piece. Like this sketch on the left is one of my favorites, but it didn't end up being in the piece at all. It's not in the story. But I think having drawn that, or for me, having written those sentences that didn't end up in the final piece, I feel like I have a better sense of the overall story, and I feel it more, if that makes any sense. Then sometimes when you're working on something, you'll ask for feedback. You can see this is an original sketch on the opening page. And again, you got to be open to feedback because you want to make it better. And so we said, boy, that's a beautiful looking village with the cliff, but there's something not quite right. Raise your hand if you see something that's not quite right with how it is in real life to the sketch. See a couple hands in the air. If you guessed that it's this building here, the mosque, you're right, because it's in the foreground in the sketch, but really here it's under the cliff. So we gave them the feedback and they said, oh, I see it now. Thank you so much for the feedback. How's that? And again, it looks really good. They've got it under the cliff there, but again, something wasn't quite right. I don't know if you can see it there on your screen, but it's again the mosque. If you know anything about mosques, these are minarets where they have the call to prayer. And on this sketch, they're both on one side, and in real life, there's one on each side towards the back. And it's very important where mosques face. And so they said, oh, we were using the side view. We weren't using the right photo. And so they fixed it, and it was much better. So revise, ask for feedback. And one thing I learned also was that it's important to work as a team. And of course, the boys did that when they were building and playing. But what I didn't know as a writer, you work as a team as well. I mean, you probably have feedback from your classmates and your teacher. And for me, I get feedback from my, I actually have helpers with the research and the people along the way, but I'm in a writing group. I also use mentor texts. I don't know if you use other people's writing. These have nothing to do with soccer or Thailand, but they're really good books. And I was reading them like a writer, and that was really helpful for me. And then I had feedback from my agent and editor, and they had teams of people helping them. Along the way, you might feel whatever you're working on, you might feel this, like it's, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do it. And of course, the boys felt this, especially at the really hard days. And so for me, if you told me how long it would take to write this story, I don't know if I would make it. Let's see one more time with your fingers. How many years do you think it took to write this story?
And
Let's
it
see.
looks like we have 2 questions in the chat from our other classroom.
All right.
Ask
So
those.
for me, it took 4 years to write this story. So that's a little bit about the process, and hopefully that's something that you all could think about, no matter what you're doing, if it's writing or not. So I don't see the chat questions, Heidi, if you could share them with me. That'd be great.
Absolutely. They asked, how did you greet Prosit? And then their second one was, did you make any more similar books?
The first one, how did I reach him? Is
How
that
did
right?
you greet him? Say hello. How did you
Oh,
greet him?
greet. How did I say hello? The very first time I said, hello, are you Prosit? He said, yes, I'm Prosit. And I said, you speak English? He said, yes. I said, thank goodness. But in Thailand, there's a very special greeting, and you put your hands, you could try it with me, put your hands together like this, and you say Sawadee ka. So you can try it now. You say Sawadee ka. And then the other question was about any other books. I will share with you this. I have a new book coming out in September. You're one of the first people to ever see the cover. This is exciting. My next book is also a true story. It takes place here in Southeast Asia, in the country of Cambodia. Here it is. And there's a city in Cambodia near Thailand. It's called Siem Reap. And if you go there, a lot of tourists go there this time to see these beautiful Angkor Wat temples, these famous temples from hundreds of years ago. But Cambodia also has a challenging, more recent history, because there were lots of wars in the 70s and 80s where soldiers planted landmines. And this is a huge problem because no one really knows where these landmines are buried. And so these brave people sign up to learn how to demine. They carry around metal detectors and check every bit of land where they think there are landmines. You can see all the blue dots here of where incidences have happened along the border. But humans aren't the only ones doing this work. I don't know if you've heard about these amazing African giant pouched rats that they've trained to walk across the landmine and sniff out the TNT powder. And it's safe because the rats are light enough that they don't detonate the land. And so they've figured out how to do this. Here's one on my shoulder when I went and visited some of the deminers. And so this book follows this rat named Magawa. He's a famous rat. He was so fast at his work. You can see he's wearing a gold medal here. He was given a gold medal. And his handler right here in the brown, her name is Mei Len. And so the story is called Rats to the Rescue, The Unlikely Heroes Making Cambodia Safe. And it's kind of a parallel story of how Mei Len vowed as a girl to become a deminer, and how scientists in Africa and Tanzania train these rats to help rid Cambodia and many other places around the world of landmines. So that one's coming out. Hope you like it.
Okay, we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So this time I'm gonna let every classroom ask 1 quick question. We just have a few minutes left. So we'll start with Ms. Jark's class.
Yeah, no, somebody, quick.
Me.
Go ahead.
So, somebody else. How was the feeling to literally How does it smell over there? You don't have a point yet. What's your favorite food from Thailand?
Somebody
What's
asked
the
what's your
question?
favorite food from Thailand.
You know what I
Oh, favorite food of Thai. There's so many wonderful Thai dishes. I forgot to tell you, as I was walking around with Prasid on the village, we were at a food stall right on the walkway, and this this woman made this wonderful fresh salad with cut up greens, spices, and bits of fruit and peanuts. And I wouldn't never have thought of putting those together, but it works so beautifully. And so we carried our little salads in little dishes and kept walking. So that was a wonderful treat.
And Ms. Hennick's class?
What was your favorite book that you wrote?
Well, this is actually, believe it or not, this is my first one. So I know I'm not supposed to have favorites, but I like the second one too. So maybe if you read both, you tell me which one you like. That would help me because I like them both. I can't choose.
And in the chat, we have the question, why did you move to Singapore? Or why do you live in?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I'm a teacher, just like your teachers. I teach at the American school here. It looks a lot like your schools, and everything is in English, and we probably do a lot of the same kind of learning at our school. We have 4,000 kids from pre-K to grade 12. And so my family's been here for a long time. And before that, we were in the Czech Republic at an international school there. And before that, we were at an international school in Indonesia. So we've been around the world at a number of international schools. We're both teachers, and our kids have grown up, and one's in college. And so that's what's brought us around the world.
Okay, that's just about all the time we have. If the students would like to unmute so that you can say thank you and goodbye, you can do that right now. Okay.
Thank you all so much. You've been an amazing audience. Thanks for meeting me early in the morning. It's 10:30 p.m. here at night, so I got to go to bed.
Thank you so much for meeting and chatting with us. Have a wonderful day at
Thanks so
school
much,
tomorrow.
Eddie. Yep. Thanks so much.